Imagine this. You're standing in the endless Siberian taiga, surrounded by forests so dense that human footsteps are rare. It's the morning of June 30th, 1908. The sun has barely risen, and the air is still, almost too still, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. And then it happens. A blinding streak of light cuts across the sky, brighter than the sun. A second later, the world explodes. A fireball erupts above the horizon, unleashing an energy so violent that 80 million trees are flattened in an instant, spreading out like a fan for more than 2,000 square kilometers. Shockwaves ripple across the land, throwing people off their feet hundreds of kilometers away. Windows shatter. Horses collapse. The sky glows like fire. In the villages closest to the blast, survivors describe it as if the heavens themselves had cracked open. Some speak of a pillar of fire, others of a second sun. Days later, across Europe, the night skies shimmer eerily, so bright that people can read newspapers at midnight without a lamp. And yet, when scientists arrive to investigate, they find no crater, no meteorite, no physical evidence of what caused it. Just endless forest, scorched and leveled in every direction, as though some invisible hand had pressed the earth flat. What was it? A meteor? A comet? A secret weapon decades ahead of its time? Or something far stranger? The Tunguska Event remains one of the greatest scientific mysteries of the 20th century. And more than a century later, the truth is still elusive. This is the story of the cosmic explosion that shook Siberia and the world. The Tunguska blast didn't happen in silence. People saw it, felt it, and some even lived to tell their terrifying stories. Far away in the small trading post of Vanavara, 65 kilometers from ground zero, a local man named Semen Semenov described the moment with chilling clarity. He remembered sitting outside his hut when the sky suddenly split apart. The sky opened up, and fire appeared high and wide over the forest. I felt great heat, as if my shirt was on fire. At that moment the sky shut closed, and I heard a mighty crash. I was thrown a few meters away. Others recalled the ground shaking as if from an earthquake. Windows shattered. Doors were blown off hinges. Horses bolted in panic, and cattle fell to the ground as though struck by lightning. One witness said, "I saw the sky in two. Fire appeared high and wide over the forest. It covered everything. The heat was unbearable. Then the heavens closed again, and there came a terrible sound, like rocks falling or guns firing. Even villages hundreds of kilometers away were shaken. In places like Kansk, glass panes shattered, and people thought a war had begun. The shockwaves circled the earth twice, registering on barometers as far away as England. But perhaps the strangest detail was what came after. For several nights across Europe and Asia, the skies glowed eerily, bright, shimmering white and silver. People from London to Stockholm reported being able to read their newspapers at midnight under the glow. Something massive had happened in Siberia that morning, something so powerful it disturbed the atmosphere of the entire planet. And yet, no one in the world could explain it. For nearly 2 decades, the blast site in central Siberia remained untouched. The Tunguska region was remote, difficult to reach, and sparsely inhabited. Roads were non-existent, rivers were unpredictable, and the dense taiga forest acted like a living wall of silence. But rumors spread of a fireball that had torn the skies, of a forest leveled as if by a god's hand. Some thought it was a meteor, others whispered of a punishment from heaven. For most of the world, it was a curiosity. For scientists, it was an unresolved riddle. It wasn't until 1927, almost 20 years after the event, that a Russian mineralogist named Leonid Kulik finally made the journey into Tunguska. He had long believed that the explosion was caused by a massive meteorite strike, and he was determined to find the crater. When Kulik and his team finally hacked their way through the unforgiving wilderness, what they saw left them speechless. Before them stretched a wasteland unlike anything in Siberia. Trees had been flattened outward in a strange radial pattern, as if some invisible hand had pressed down and blown them away from a single point of origin. Imagine walking into a forest where, for dozens of kilometers, the trees no longer stand but lie prostrate, their trunks pointing away like the spokes of a giant wheel. Some were snapped like matchsticks, others stripped of branches as though a firestorm had licked them clean. And yet, there was no crater. Kulik had expected to find a gaping hole in the earth, perhaps filled with shattered rock or fragments of a meteorite. But instead, all he found was marshland, scorched soil, and endless fallen trees. The devastation was staggering. The blast had flattened more than 2,000 square kilometers of forest, an area nearly the size of a major city like Tokyo or Los Angeles. It is estimated that 80 million trees had been destroyed in a single instant. And then came something even stranger. In the very center of the devastation, the spot where one would expect to see the largest destruction, Kulik's team found something uncanny. Trees that were scorched, but still standing upright, like blackened poles. They hadn't been knocked down like the others, but they had been stripped bare by heat so intense it turned bark to charcoal in seconds. It was as if a fireball had hovered above them, unleashing its fury from the sky rather than striking the ground. Kulik was both fascinated and frustrated. He scoured the land for signs of meteoritic rock, but none appeared. He sent men to dig, to probe the marshes, to search for fragments that might explain what had happened. Days passed. Weeks passed. Nothing. The mystery only deepened when local Evenki tribesmen, the indigenous people of the region, shared their stories. They spoke of a thunderbird descending from the sky, of spirits angry with the earth, of a ball of fire that roared like the voice of 1,000 storms. For them, the land was cursed. They warned Kulik not to linger, but Kulik pressed on. He took photographs, mapped the radial pattern of destruction, and collected what little evidence he could. He returned to Moscow empty-handed, no crater, no fragments, no proof of a meteorite. And yet, he was convinced that some kind of cosmic object had exploded above Tunguska. The expedition left more questions than answers. If it was a meteor, why was there no impact crater? If it was a comet, why were there no chemical traces left in the soil? And if it was neither, then what on Earth, or beyond Earth, could have caused a blast equal to 15 megatons of TNT, 1,000 times stronger than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima? The devastation was undeniable. But the source of that devastation remained maddeningly out of reach. And so the legend of Tunguska began to take shape. A story of fire from the heavens, a forest leveled, and a mystery that science struggled to explain. But this was only the beginning, because the more scientists studied Tunguska, the more the mystery seemed to grow, and soon attention turned to one glaring absence, the missing crater. When Leonid Kulik returned from Tunguska with photographs and notes, he thought the scientific world would embrace the evidence. Instead, he was met with disbelief. How could such destruction exist without a crater? Every great impact in Earth's history had left scars. The Chicxulub crater in Mexico, created by the asteroid that doomed the dinosaurs, stretched nearly 200 kilometers wide. Smaller meteorites, even the size of cars, gouged deep wounds in the ground when they fell. Yet here, in the heart of Siberia, an explosion more powerful than any bomb of the time had flattened the forest, but left the earth untouched. This was the first great paradox of Tunguska, and it drove scientists into a frenzy of theories. Some argued the object had been a comet, composed mostly of ice and dust. As it entered the atmosphere, the friction and heat would have vaporized it before impact. The explosion would have occurred in the air itself, unleashing an immense shockwave but leaving no solid debris behind. Others countered that if it were a comet, there should have been frozen water traces in the soil or chemical signatures of exotic gases. Yet none were found. The soil samples were ordinary, scorched, yes, but containing nothing alien. Then came a second, darker possibility. What if the Tunguska event wasn't caused by a comet at all, but by something stranger? Some geologists wondered if a natural gas explosion from beneath the Earth could explain it. Methane released from permafrost, igniting into a fireball. But this theory collapsed under scrutiny. The radial pattern of destruction was too clean, too symmetrical, too much like an aerial blast. It seemed undeniable that the event had come from above, not below. Kulik himself leaned heavily toward a meteorite, a stony object perhaps tens of meters across, which had burned in the atmosphere and exploded before reaching the ground. But if that were true, where were the fragments? Where were the iron-rich pieces, the shattered shards, the cosmic dust that should have rained down? The expedition had uncovered none. The absence of a crater didn't just puzzle scientists, it haunted them. Newspapers began publishing fantastical theories. That a rogue black hole had grazed Earth, that antimatter had collided with the planet, or even that a piece of alien technology had detonated above the forest. The wildest speculations were fueled by the fact that Tunguska was so remote, so poorly documented, and so poorly understood. No photographs of the fireball existed. No eyewitness accounts were written until decades later. Everything was hearsay, stitched together from memory and folklore. And yet, the devastation was real. Trees did not lie. The scorched poles at the epicenter stood like witnesses. Something unimaginably powerful had happened here. Scientists grew desperate for hard evidence. In the 1930s, Kulik returned to Tunguska with larger expeditions. He set up camps, brought horses, and drilled into the swampy ground at the suspected epicenter. But again, nothing. No buried meteor, no alien minerals, just peat, mud, and waterlogged soil. It was as if the Earth itself had swallowed the truth. By now, whispers began to circulate outside scientific circles. Soviet writers suggested that Tunguska might have been a weapons test, an experimental explosion by secret forces. Others tied it to legends, the wrath of ancient gods, or the shamanic curse of Siberia's native tribes. But perhaps the most persistent parallel came from folklore much older than modern Russia. Ancient stories from across cultures spoke of fire descending from the sky, of gods riding thunderbolts, of the heavens punishing the earth. Could Tunguska be a modern echo of those myths? Not divine punishment, but a cosmic event so extraordinary that it blurred the line between science and legend? Still, the scientific community refused to abandon the search. Over the decades, teams returned again and again. They took aerial photographs, mapped the radial patterns of the fallen forest, and compared them to nuclear blast simulations. The resemblance was chilling. The flattened trees looked eerily similar to the aftermath of the atomic bombings in Japan. But Tunguska had occurred decades earlier, before humanity had split the atom. This uncanny resemblance only deepened the mystery. In the end, the absence of a crater became Tunguska's defining feature. It was the hole in the evidence, the silence in the noise, a blast that had the power of a nuclear detonation, but no weapon, a cosmic event without a cosmic scar. And so the question lingered. If not a crater, then what? The answer, some believed, lay not in the ground, but in the sky. Because as scientists studied more closely, it became clear that whatever had exploded over Tunguska had never actually touched the Earth. And that revelation would send them chasing theories stranger than fiction. The mystery of Tunguska was not buried in the soil, it was suspended in the air. As scientists returned again and again to the Siberian wilderness, they began piecing together a theory that would forever reshape the way we think about cosmic threats. What happened that summer morning in 1908, they argued, was not a traditional impact at all. It was something far more elusive, an airburst. Imagine a massive rock from space, perhaps 60 meters wide, racing toward Earth at nearly 30,000 miles per hour. As it tears through the atmosphere, the pressure builds. The air beneath it compresses like an invisible wall, heating the object to thousands of degrees. The rock shatters, disintegrating in a blinding flash before it ever reaches the ground. The explosion that follows is not the product of impact, but of sudden release, a mid-air detonation that can rival the most powerful nuclear weapons ever built. And this, researchers concluded, was the fate of Tunguska's mysterious visitor. A cosmic intruder that broke apart in the skies of Siberia, unleashing an inferno of pressure and heat that flattened the forest below without leaving a crater. The airburst theory seemed to answer many questions. The radial pattern of destruction made sense. Trees knocked outward from a central blast high above. The scorched trees at the epicenter fit too, their branches stripped away by a downward shockwave, leaving them like torches planted in the earth. Even the eyewitness testimonies aligned. Survivors spoke of a fiery object streaking across the dawn sky, glowing so brightly it could be seen hundreds of miles away. Some recalled a series of booms like artillery fire. Others described a blast so intense it knocked them unconscious. One man, more than 40 miles from ground zero, was thrown clear off his porch by the force. It was as if the heavens themselves had unleashed their fury. But even as the airburst theory gained traction, it brought with it troubling implications. If a cosmic visitor could explode above Siberia with the force of a hydrogen bomb, what would happen if such an event occurred above a city? In 2013, a century after Tunguska, the world got a chilling glimpse of the answer. Over Chelyabinsk, another Russian city, a meteor about 20 meters wide entered Earth's atmosphere. It exploded in an airburst, shattering windows, damaging buildings, and injuring over 1,500 people. And that object was only a fraction the size of the one that struck Tunguska. The Chelyabinsk event suddenly validated what scientists had long feared. Tunguska was not an anomaly, it was a warning. Still, many remained unsatisfied. The airburst theory explained much, but not everything. For one, there were still no fragments. Even when meteors explode in the air, they typically scatter debris, smaller pieces that survived the descent. Yet decades of searching around Tunguska yielded almost nothing. There were also strange reports of magnetic anomalies in the area, as if the explosion had briefly warped the Earth's electromagnetic field. Scientists suggested this could be the result of massive energy release, but others whispered of something far stranger, an event not purely natural, but perhaps artificial. Speculations spiraled. Some fringe theorists insisted Tunguska was caused by a crashed UFO, a ship that exploded mid-flight, vaporizing itself before impact. Others linked it to the experiments of Nikola Tesla, who at the time was testing wireless power transmission. Could one of Tesla's experiments have accidentally unleashed a beam of energy across the world, striking Tunguska with surgical precision? The Soviet Union, secretive and hungry for control, was not above fueling these rumors. At times, they even encouraged the idea that Tunguska was a kind of natural nuclear explosion, a narrative that kept foreign scientists guessing. And yet, for all the outlandish theories, the evidence kept circling back to the same truth. A visitor from the cosmos had come to Earth that day. It had not struck the ground, but exploded above it, releasing energy equal to 15 megatons of TNT, 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The Earth had been spared not by luck, but by altitude. If the Tunguska object had made it just a few miles further before breaking apart, there might have been no Siberian forest left to study, only a crater, and perhaps a wound in human history that would still be healing today. But if the airburst theory explained the mechanics, it still left a haunting silence. Where exactly had the object come from? Was it an asteroid, a comet, or something in between? Why had it chosen that desolate corner of Siberia, and how many more were waiting in the cold void of space? The blast at Tunguska was not just an isolated event. It was a reminder of Earth's fragility, a warning that the cosmos does not negotiate, and that in the endless sweep of time, humanity is not untouchable. For scientists, the mystery of Tunguska became more than a riddle to solve. It became a shadow on the future, proof that the skies themselves could one day turn against us again. And the more they studied, the more unsettling the possibilities became. Because Tunguska was not the first time fire had fallen from the sky, and it would not be the last. The airburst theory might have satisfied scientists, but for everyone else, it left the imagination wide open. If the Tunguska event was truly just a rock from space, then why did it behave so strangely? Why no fragments, no crater, no smoking gun? The absence of proof was fertile ground, and myths, rumors, and radical theories grew like wildfire. Perhaps the most enduring of these centered around a man already shrouded in mystery: Nikola Tesla. In the years leading up to 1908, Tesla was working on his Wardenclyffe Tower project, a massive structure designed to transmit wireless electricity across the globe. His experiments had already produced eerie results: glowing lamps miles away, bursts of energy that seemed to travel through the air itself. Tesla even boasted that his invention could focus energy like a weapon, powerful enough to split the Earth like an apple. So when a remote region of Siberia suddenly erupted with the force of 1,000 Hiroshimas, some began connecting dots. Could Tesla have inadvertently tested his so-called death ray? Had he aimed his energy beam across the globe, striking Tunguska by accident or design? Tesla never admitted such a thing, but letters and journals from the time reveal he was desperate to prove his tower's potential. Some conspiracy theorists even claim Tesla was attempting to demonstrate the weapon to financiers, showing he could hit any point on Earth with terrifying precision. Tunguska, in this telling, was the first and only live test. It's a dramatic story, but no hard evidence exists. Tesla's tower never reached full power, and historians argue it was unlikely he could generate anything close to the energy released in Siberia. Still, the Tesla connection refuses to die, a ghost that haunts the fringes of Tunguska lore. But Tesla was not the only suspect. Others suggested the explosion was no accident of science or nature, but an act of alien technology. Eyewitness reports mentioned a glowing object streaking through the sky, sometimes described as cylindrical or metallic. Some claimed it changed direction before exploding, as if controlled. In the absence of fragments, believers argued the craft had self-destructed, vaporizing to prevent its technology from falling into human hands. Even more elaborate versions of the UFO theory suggest that the Tunguska Event was not a crash at all, but a deliberate detonation to protect Earth. According to this idea, the object was a hostile asteroid, and an alien vessel sacrificed itself to destroy it in mid-air, saving humanity from annihilation. It sounds like science fiction, but then again, so did the destruction itself. To the average person in 1908, fire raining from the heavens might as well have been a battle among gods. And yet, even these theories paled compared to the strangest of them all: the possibility that Tunguska was caused not by matter, but by the universe's most exotic forces. In the mid-20th century, some physicists speculated that a chunk of antimatter could have collided with Earth. When antimatter meets ordinary matter, the two annihilate in a burst of energy. Such an event could theoretically produce the immense explosion at Tunguska without leaving debris. But skeptics point out that if antimatter were involved, the energy signature would have been vastly different. Another idea: a tiny black hole had grazed the planet. Passing through Earth, it would have released massive energy on entry and exit, creating a Tunguska-like blast. But if that were true, where was the exit wound? No such destruction was found on the opposite side of the globe. For others, the event was tied to folklore itself. The native Evenki people of Siberia spoke of a thunder god, Agdi, who hurled fiery stones from the heavens to punish humanity. To them, Tunguska was not a mystery at all. It was a divine act, a fulfillment of stories passed down for generations. Science dismissed the myths, but even scientists could not deny their resonance. A ball of fire descending from the sky, flattening forests, and terrifying witnesses was exactly the kind of memory that could live on for thousands of years, shaping legends across cultures. Had humanity always lived under the shadow of Tunguska-like events, each one burned into memory as myth? The flood of competing theories, Tesla, UFOs, antimatter, black holes, gods, did more than confuse the issue. They reflected the unease that Tunguska had stirred in the human psyche. Because if no single theory could fully explain what happened, then perhaps the world was not as secure, not as predictable as science had promised. And the more researchers searched for answers, the more elusive the truth seemed to become. By the mid-20th century, Tunguska had become more than a scientific puzzle. It was a mirror, reflecting our fears of cosmic catastrophe, our distrust of technology, our fascination with the unknown. It was a story that could be bent into a warning, a prophecy, or even a legend of salvation. But one truth remained unshaken. Something from beyond our world had visited Siberia. It had unleashed destruction beyond comprehension, and it had left behind a silence that no theory could fully fill. And as the Cold War dawned, that silence would take on a darker, more ominous meaning. Because now humanity had built its own Tunguskas, and they were not falling from the sky, but rising from the ground. By the time the 20th century reached its midpoint, the mystery of Tunguska had taken on an unsettling new shape. The world had entered the atomic age, and suddenly, the Siberian blast no longer seemed like an isolated natural disaster. It looked eerily familiar. When the first nuclear bombs were tested in the deserts of New Mexico and later unleashed on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, scientists noticed something uncanny. The landscapes left behind bore a chilling resemblance to Tunguska. At ground zero of those tests, trees and structures were vaporized. Further out, trunks were snapped like matchsticks, fanning outward from the blast center. At the edges, forests were scorched but still standing, stripped of leaves. The symmetry of destruction was almost identical to the Siberian forest of 1908. The comparisons could not be ignored. Had humanity accidentally recreated, on a smaller scale, what nature had unleashed decades earlier? For Soviet scientists, the parallel carried heavy weight. The Soviet Union was racing to develop its own nuclear arsenal, and Tunguska became a convenient lens through which to study large-scale explosions. Some even speculated that the event might have been a kind of natural nuclear reaction, a phenomenon never before understood. But this theory collapsed under scrutiny. Nuclear blasts leave traces of radiation. Tunguska did not. If there had been radioactive isotopes in the soil, they would have lingered for centuries. None were found. The Siberian forest had suffered a cataclysm, yes, but not one of human design. Still, the atomic age changed how people thought about Tunguska. What had once been dismissed as a bizarre meteor strike now felt like a warning. It showed humanity just how fragile Earth's surface really was, how little it would take to devastate whole regions. If a rock from the sky could flatten 80 million trees, then what would happen if nuclear war ignited cities across the globe? In a strange way, Tunguska became a metaphor. It wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what could happen again, this time by human hands. The Cold War only sharpened these fears. With the superpowers building weapons capable of ending civilization, Tunguska transformed into a reference point. Articles compared the 1908 blast to hydrogen bombs. Politicians hinted at it in speeches. For ordinary people, the parallels blurred the line between natural disaster and man-made apocalypse. Yet amid all this, Tunguska's riddle remained unsolved. Decades of expeditions, aerial surveys, and scientific analysis had failed to pin down the object that caused it. No fragments, no crater, no clear fingerprint. Just devastation frozen in time. And the more scientists studied, the more they realized how rare and how terrifyingly common such events could be. Tunguska was not a freak occurrence. Earth has always been a target, circling through cosmic shooting ranges where asteroids and comets wander. The only reason Tunguska seemed unique was that it had struck a wilderness instead of a city. What if it hadn't? The thought haunted scientists and governments alike. Because Tunguska was not only a mystery of the past, it was a reminder of the future. And that future felt uncomfortably close. More than a century has passed since that morning in 1908 when Siberia shook beneath a fireball no one saw coming. The forest has healed. New trees stand where millions once fell. Life has returned to the swampy plains. And yet, the scar of Tunguska endures, not on the land, but in humanity's collective memory. Today, satellites orbit Earth, scanning the skies for anything resembling the object that exploded over Siberia. Astronomers track tens of thousands of near-Earth objects, asteroids and comets that wander dangerously close to our planet's path. Some are small, the size of cars. Others stretch miles wide, big enough to darken the atmosphere and collapse civilizations. And every time one of these cosmic intruders flashes across the news, Tunguska's shadow looms large. Why? Because Tunguska was not unique. It was just lucky. Lucky that it struck a remote wilderness instead of Moscow, London, or New York. Had the explosion taken place 4 hours later, when Earth's rotation placed St. Petersburg directly in the blast zone, millions could have died. The course of history itself might have changed overnight. This chilling "what if" has driven modern science to take the threat seriously. NASA and other space agencies now run programs to monitor the sky, hunting for objects on a collision course. The European Space Agency even has missions designed to test planetary defense. The idea that we might one day push an asteroid off its path, saving Earth from a Tunguska-scale catastrophe. But here's the sobering truth. We're still not ready. In 2013, a fireball streaked across the sky over Chelyabinsk, Russia, not far from Tunguska's old scar. It exploded in the atmosphere with the force of 30 atomic bombs, shattering windows across the city and injuring over 1,000 people. And no one saw it coming. It was Tunguska in miniature, a cosmic reminder that the universe does not care about human borders or technology. The difference this time? The blast happened over a city. If Chelyabinsk had been slightly larger, if Tunguska had been slightly closer to a populated region, the results would have been catastrophic. And unlike in 1908, the world is no longer vast wilderness. Today, every corner of Earth is filled with towns, cities, and people. There is no empty Siberia left to absorb the blow. The Tunguska event lingers because it forces us to confront a terrifying reality. The sky is not empty. Earth is not safe. We are a planet exposed, moving silently through a cosmic minefield. And perhaps that is why the legend of Tunguska feels more powerful today than ever. Some still whisper about alien craft, secret weapons, or lost civilizations. But maybe the real lesson is far simpler and far more unsettling. It reminds us that our world can change in an instant, without warning, from forces far beyond our control. As scientists warn, it's not a question of if another Tunguska will happen. It's only a question of when. And when it does, will we be ready? The forest in Siberia may have grown back. The swamp may have swallowed the old impact zone. But the echo of that morning in 1908 still drifts across time, a cosmic warning written in fire and silence. One day, the sky will fall again.